Bizline looks into what it means for the Bank of Korea to stay put on the benchmark rate, what the experts think about the move. Selection of antibacterial cutting board for different uses. We visited the #1 in the industry. The war is on for the Launcher program to become the starting feature of smartphones. We look into what the Launcher program is all about. What is South Korea's current economic condition? What does it have to do? We've met with Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University to find out. What meaning does Kaesong Industrial Complex hold for both South and North Koreas? We looked into its history and economic meaning.
Hello, I'm Andrew Salmon and welcome to Bizline. Once again, as you can see, we are at COEX, Seoul's top convention and exhibition centre. And here there are a wide range of events taking place, including the Happy Spring Festival. Please make a point of coming to see it because all profits go to charity. Clearly then, spring has sprung in Korea and we're all hoping for an economic boom to join the spring blooms. But all is not well in the South Korean economy at present. Since its striking rebound from the GFC, or the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, Korea's growth rates, once stellar, have slowed. This year we're only looking at GDP growth rates of less than 3%. What is behind this slowdown? We'll be talking to a macroeconomic expert to find out. But before we do that, let's take a look at some of this week's business and economic news from here in South Korea.
Bank of Korea decided to keep the rates at their current levels after assessing various factors, such as inflation, growth, and GDP levels at home and abroad. Analysts had widely expected a rate cut because the new Park Geun-hye administration has been emphasizing the need to revive the sluggish economy. Korea's jobless rate fell in March from a month earlier, and job creation also picked up its speed. Statistics Korea data shows the nation's unemployment rate stood at 3.5% last month, down from 4% in February, while job creation accelerated. In the first policy coordination meeting among rival political parties and the government, policymakers agreed to ease the requirements for proposed tax exemptions for home buyers and sellers. The party says the current price threshold unfairly benefits those living in Seoul's affluent Gangnam district, where homes tend to be more expensive, and that it could further burden homeowners with high mortgage payments. According to the Korea International Trade Association, Korea's major shipment export items are taking a hit due to the weaker Japanese yen. 24 out of 49 export items in direct competition with Japanese products saw overseas market sales decline. Automobiles and mobile phones, along with various Korean liquor exports, were hit the hardest by the weaker yen. Korean companies, particularly family-controlled conglomerates, will face tougher tax audits this year, with the country's National Tax Service pledging to raise revenue by cracking down on tax evasion practices. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy also said it will launch a thorough investigation on conglomerates believed to be resorting to unfair business practices that are designed to maximize profits at the expense of suppliers.
April. For the 6th straight month, the Bank of Korea, or BOK, has kept the key interest rate unchanged. Now, the South Korean government had been nudging the bank to actually lower the rate, and the market too had expected some movement. Clearly, however, the Bank of Korea has stuck to its guns. Clearly, also, their top economic policy thinkers don't believe the economy yet needs any stimulus. What's behind their thinking? Let's take a look.
Recession, sluggishness are the words we have been hearing for some time, along with the quantitative easing, stimulative measures, and even Abenomics in an attempt to revive the struggling economies. Stock markets and currencies fluctuate on any policy announcements to resuscitate the economy back to a full recovery. South Korea is no exception, and it is also struggling and looking to add some zest to the economic recovery process. Then what do the public think about the status of the Korean economy? Is it going anywhere for the better?
요즘 이제 실물 경기가 너무 안 좋잖아요. 손님들이 이게 힘드니까 아무래도 장사가 요즘 너무 힘들죠.
대통령도 바뀌었잖아요. 그러니까 좀 나아지지 않을까라는 기대감이 엄청 큰데 모르겠어요. 아직까지는 실감을 못 느끼고 있어요.
좀 힘들기는 하지만 그래도 희망을 가지고 그냥 열심히 하는 거죠. 네.
The market and the people are eagerly waiting for more measures to be taken to support the economic recovery process, with the new President Park Geun-hye taking office in February.
재정만 낭비하는 헛수고가 될 것입니다.
In part, there are expectations that the Bank of Korea would help the government by adjusting its benchmark rate. But the central bank decided to keep its benchmark 7-day repurchase rate at 2.75% for 6 months in a row for the month of April.
정부나 하는 관계자분들이 그 인터뷰상으로는 금리 인하를 금년에 한두 번 정도 한다고 하셨는데 그 시기가 4월이 가장 적정하다고 했는데 그게 약간 빗나갔습니다.
The decision was based on BOK's belief that the global economy will continue gradual recovery despite delayed process in the euro area and uncertainties from the U.S.'s fiscal tightening.
소위 경제의 성장세가 현재로서는 개선되는 상태를 보이고 있다.
The move is somewhat taken as a positive signal that the economy is on the course of recovery. But there is also a view that the Bank of Korea may have done so to shout out its independence from the Park administration, as Professor Ju Dong-han, a veteran of the BOK from some 15 years of working there, explains.
Considering the low inflation rate and the growth rate forecast that was also adjusted to the downward side might be justified. Could be justified the lowering the interest rate. The problem was the intervention of politicians or the government officials. I think they prevented the chance of lowering the interest rate at this time.
The policy interest rate has been the topic of debate among politicians, more so because its role is increasing on our everyday lives, with the household debt amounting to more than 900 trillion won, or around $800 billion US. A policy rate adjustment directly affects consumers' borrowing cost and the consumer spending power.
Households accumulated a lot of household debt. So if the interest rate is raised, then the debt burden for the household will rise, which will increase the possibility of reducing the consumption. And on the other hand, if it lower the interest rate, then it is recommending for the household to accumulate more their debt.
So what's the next move for the BOK? And when can we actually feel that the economy is back on the right track? Other than the geopolitical risks stemming from the north, the U.S. should play a key role.
한국 경제가 이제 회복이 되려면 그래서 미국 경기의 좀 어떤 기대들이 좀 더 높아져야 되고요. 2, 4분기 늦어도 3, 4분기까지는 이제 새로 부채 한도를 설정을 하고 이 부분에 대한 합의가 이루어질 것으로 보이기 때문에 그 이후에는 미국 경제도 좀 개선될 수 있다. 그렇게 해서 보면 하반기부터는 경기가 회복되는 속도들이 상대적으로 빠를 거다라고 생각을 하고요. 실제 성장률 수치가 그렇게 차이는 많이 안 나겠지만 체감도로 보면 상반기보다 하반기 경기 회복 속도는 2배 정도 빠른 걸로 나타날 수 있을 것으로 생각을 하고 있습니다.
As such, the Korean economy is expected to pick up noticeable speed in the second half of this year. But does that mean that the pressure is off the BOK for further monetary easing? The market consensus has slightly been revised that the BOK may not cut the base rate twice this year after all, but maybe just once. So further monetary easing is not out of the picture yet. For sustainable economic recovery and growth, the central bank isn't the only place people and the government should turn to.
I think the most important thing in our economy is to solve the problem of polarization, and the possible measure for solving the problem is to create a decent job and also to provide the environment for the newly entered entrepreneurs in the market.
There is a debate over where the Korean economy is going, but at least for now, on the perspective of the Bank of Korea, South Korea is on a track of recovery. However, the process cannot be depended on to take a course of its own and just through policy rate adjustments. The government should also focus its efforts to create jobs as a means to steady income and improve domestic consumption, making the nation once again attractive for all investors within Korea and abroad.
It used to be said, the dirtier the kitchen, the better the chef. But of course that was then, this is now. And today, hygiene is king in the kitchen. And in any kitchen, one of the key interfaces with the food we eat is the humble cutting board. Problem: many cutting boards may not be as hygienic as they should be, particularly if we use the same board for cutting our meat, our vegetables, our fish and our breads. Clearly then, there is a need worldwide in restaurants and homes for an antibacterial cutting board. And that is exactly the product this week's Hidden Champion is producing.
The kitchen is one place around the house where food for the family is prepared using ingredients from the mountains, the field and the sea. It's a place that should be pleasant and clean. Enhancing the atmosphere around the kitchen is a special cutting board. Customers are attracted by the colorful display of kitchenware at a department store kitchenware corner. Among the kitchenware on display is the antibacterial cutting board, which is a hit item, gaining popularity among housewives.
건강을 생각하다 보니까는 오늘 도마 보러 왔더니 여기 항균 도마가 있다 그래서 지금 봤는데 들어보니까는 참 좋은 것 같아요. 그 안에까지 미세 성분까지 향균이 되게끔 들어있다고 들어서 이거를 안심하고 사용할 수 있을 것 같아요. 그래서 오늘 하나 구입해 가려고 생각 중이거든요.
Housewife Chun Hyun-ju bought the antibacterial cutting board when she started to make baby food for her child.
도마 위생이 정말 중요한데 아무리 좋은 식자재를 이용하더라도 도마가 위생적이지 않으면 아무 소용이 없잖아요. 또 여름철도 다가오고 날씨가 따뜻해지니까 도마 위생에 더 신경을 써야 될 것 같아서 항균 도마 선택하시는 거는 이제 선택이 아니고 필수 같아요.
The antibacterial cutting board has added color around her kitchen as she now uses different color cutting boards according to the ingredient she is preparing.
주방에 놔도 되게 포인트가 되고 그래서 그 일반 도마는 사용하고 이렇게 밑에다 다 숨겨놓고 이런 식으로 쓰잖아요. 그래서 위에 놔두고 쓰니까 인테리어 효과도 있는 것 같아서 굉장히 좋게 사용하고 있어요.
Korean kitchen brand Neoflam is an innovative product that has brought change in the kitchen. The company specializes in kitchenware and has focused in developing a unique cutting board. Cutting boards created by Neoflam come in 90 different varieties. It also comes in all sorts of different colors, but most importantly, the cutting board includes a globally used antibacterial material called microban. The company is an exclusive maker of this special material.
마이크로벤 항균제가 들어있는 저희 네오플램 항균 도마는 겉표면만 항균제가 코팅이 되어 있는 게 아니고 내부 깊숙한 곳까지 골고루 항균제가 분포되어 있기 때문에 소비자께서 사용하시는 그 순간까지 항균 효과가 그대로 유지하여서 오랫동안 위생적으로 사용할 수 있습니다.
The company has exclusive global rights to produce the antibacterial material microban in the domestic market. The whole process of gaining such rights involved strong determination by the firm.
미국의 마이크로반이라는 회사가 항균 물질을 생산하는 데 있어서는 전 세계 1위였습니다. 근데 저희들이 신생업체로서 찾아가서 우리가 도마를 한번 만들어 볼 테니까 너희들 항균 물질을 공급해 달라, 우리한테만 공급해 달라, 이런 제안을 했을 때 저쪽에서는 너희들을 뭘 믿고 공급하느냐 하는 문제가 생기지 않겠습니까? 그래서 저희들이 처음에 항균 물질을 사면서 바이 오와 페이 조건으로 만약 우리가 연간 50만 부를 항균 물질을 못 사게 되면 그 금액을 주겠다는 계약을 냈습니다. 그래서 저희들이 전 세계 도움을 얻을 수 있었고요. 그 당시에 50만 불이라는 금액은 저희 회사 자본금 총액이었습니다. 그래서 만약에 성공적이지 못했다면 상당히 어려운 상황을 겪었을 것으로 생각합니다.
Cutting boards need to be sanitized thoroughly every day, since food residue left on the surface, coupled with humidity, creates the environment for bacteria to grow. The antibacterial cutting board, with its semi-permanent antibacterial effects, blocks any spread of germs. According to a research by the Korea Conformity Laboratories, the antibacterial cutting boards prove to eliminate 99.9% of germs. Neoflam's antibacterial cutting boards are exported to some 60 countries around the world. The special cutting boards take up 25% of the domestic market, ranking first place among other similar products. Neoflam has achieved remarkable growth in sales over a short span of time, maintaining a steady growth rate.
주방이라는 공간이 주부들이 가장 많이 사용하는 공간 중에 하나입니다. 그래서 주방에 들어섰을 때 주부 스스로가 좀 즐거울 수 있고, 그래서 즐겁게 요리를 해서 그 요리를 가지고 식구들이 같이 즐길 수 있는 그런 개념으로 색깔이라든지 디자인이라든지 이런 것들을 조금 더 그냥 칙칙한 어떤 그런 주방이 아니라 화사하게 만들고 싶은 것이 저희들의 꿈입니다.
Kitchenware is being made in appealing designs, which enhances the environment of the kitchen, with consideration for hygiene and people's health. Many more related companies are looking for opportunities to enter the cutting board market, which is expected to grow in the future. The opportunity to rise to the top derives from new ideas backed by a unique approach. People's lives are expected to benefit from companies with unique ideas, which is the driving force for the future of industrial Korea.
Today, everybody owns a wide range of personal technologies, and of course everybody wants to personalize those near identical technologies. How do you change the face or the personality of that most popular of gadgets, the smartphone? The answer is a launcher program. A launcher program is an increasingly popular little app that allows you to create your own personal user interface on the face of your phone. We're going to have a look at some of the choices of launcher programs which are now becoming available.
The latest hot issue in the ICT industry is Facebook's new home screen app that the company released last week. After years of rumors, Facebook finally introduced Facebook Phone. But unlike the rumors, the company released one of launcher apps that are familiar to smartphone users, not an actual cell phone. Facebook users can log into Facebook or chat with friends through Facebook Messenger directly from home screens of their phones. Korean major portal and SNS companies are in fierce competition to raise their market shares by offering specially designed user interface for smartphone users. Launcher programs help users to create his or her own home screens with ease. Unlike an iPhone, in which the user has to stick to the phone's original home screen setup, an Android phone user can customize the screen setup through a launcher program.
아이콘을 제 사진으로 바꿀 수도 있고 제가 좋아하는 톤의 배경화면을 화면으로 넣을 수도 있으니까 참 흥미롭고 재밌는 것 같아요.
The launcher is attractive to not only users, but also portal or SNS service providers because it helps increase users' chances to access to their services. Still, it has not been easy to develop a program that can work in sync with various apps on home screens. The keys to survive in the fierce competition in the launcher market are not only good contents, but also technologies that can help optimize launchers for smartphones. Some of the existing launchers often crash because they take up too much memory. Therefore, developers are on a constant search to find ways to make launchers to offer optimized systems for Android phones. But major local domestic portal and SNS service providers have lately released launchers developed to link to various apps of their major services. Dodo Launcher offers distinctive services, allowing users to personalize their phones and link to neighbor services. The launcher users can download 140 different themes for free, while cute design options and celebrity themes are available targeting young users. Its users can also have easy access to neighbor services, such as its search engine that will pop up on home screens right after the installation of Dodo Launcher.
기본 테마로 제공한 것 중에 B1A4나 샤이니 같은 글로벌 아이돌 스타들의 테마들이 적용됐는데 한국 시장만을 타겟으로 해서 우선 그 제품을 출시했지만 동남아나 유럽이나 이런 데서도 도돌런처를 꽤 많이 사용하고 계시거든요. 그러면 좋은 퀄리티의 좋은 제품을 제공한다라고 하면 국내뿐만 아니라 글로벌에서도 충분히 승산이 있지 않을까 그런 기대를 가지고 있습니다.
Users can simply download pre-made themes, but the number of users who design their home screens has been growing. Cha Jung-pyong is a college student majoring in design, and his new hobby is designing the home screen of his phone with his own drawings of various characters.
핸드폰 화면을 사용하는데 제가 주인이잖아요. 그래서 제가 사용하는 어플들이나 그리고 기능들을 더 빠르게 그리고 더 편리하게 사용을 할 수 있는 위치에다가 제가 설정을 하고 디자인을 하기 때문에 제가 사용하는 만족도도 더 높고 그리고 사용하는 데 편의성이 저에게 맞춰져 있기 때문에 더 좋은 것 같습니다.
BuzzPia is the company that Daum holds a stake in, and it developed Buzz Launcher. Compared to the existing launchers, Buzz Launcher allows users to share their personalized home screens with fellow users around the globe. The home screens customized via Buzz Launcher are called home packs.
이게 이제 저희가 서비스하고 있는 버즈런처에 기본적으로 깔리는 홈 화면이라고 볼 수가 있는데요. 보시다시피 이제 일반적으로 이용하는 그 홈 화면하고 많이 다르죠. 여기 보면 이제 날씨 위젯이라든지 아이콘의 어떤 이미지들이 이제 완전히 달라지고, 그 다음에 이런 전체적으로 이제 배치라고 하는 부분들까지 이제 똑같은 게 아니라 적용을 내가 해서 나만의 홈 스크린으로 이제 편집을 쉽게 할 수 있는 부분들이 이제 저희가 다른 부분이라고 볼 수가 있죠.
Buzz Launcher is a user-centric open platform, allowing its users to upload, download, or tweak pre-made home packs among themselves. Buzz Launcher is a big hit in the global market because overseas users account for 80% of active users of Buzz Launcher, and 40% of them are in the US.
홈스크린, 홈팩의 컨텐츠가 초기 저희가 시작을 했을 때 한 300개 정도 해서 시작을 했는데 이미 3주 정도 서비스를 했음에도 불구하고 3,000개가 넘는 컨텐츠가 이미 만들어져 있거든요. 그런 추세로 볼 때 조만간 10,000개, 20,000개가 넘는 그런 홈팩이 만들어질 수 있다고 생각을 하고, 좋은 컨텐츠가 많아지는 거고, 좋은 컨텐츠가 많아진다라고 하는 건 결국 유저들 입장에서 이제 선택할 수 있는 폭이 굉장히 많아지는 거죠.
And there's more to come. Kakao, one of the major local and global SNS players with Kakao Talk and Kakao Story, also plans to introduce Kakao Home that is optimized for Kakao services in a bid to take the lead in the fast-growing launcher market.
런처라는 게 배경화면을 개성 있게 꾸미는 기본적인 프로그램인데, 런처를 깔면서 자주 사용하는 앱들을 어떻게 전시할지 이런 것들을 런처가 결정하게 되어 있거든요. 그렇다 보니까 보다 자기 서비스로 유저들이 빠르게 이동하기 원하는 그런 사업자들이 페이스북도 그렇고 카카오톡도 그렇고 다음이나 네이버도 동일하게 자기들의 런처 스타일을 조금 유저들한테 소개하려고 하는 거 아닌가 그렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
Smartphone users' interest has shifted to user interface from hardware. The public's interest in launchers helping users to personalize their phones is expected to rise further with growing popularity of smartphones. In the light, who will be the winner of the launcher war, and what is the future for Android smartphones?
Hello and welcome to our interview segment. Now, with the South Korean government, the Park Geun-hye administration, still in its early honeymoon period, there are two big questions. One is what will be the North Korean policy? Two, more domestically, what will be its economic policy? To answer the second question, who would be a finer person to speak to than a professor of economics at one of Korea's top 10 universities, Kyung-hee? That man is Professor Shin Sang-hyuk. He's joined us today on Bizline. Professor, thank you for joining us and being in the hot seat.
It is my pleasure.
Okay, let's kick off immediately. The Bank of Korea has lowered this year's economic growth forecast to 2.5%. The government has also revised its forecast downward from 3% to 2.3%. These are big downgrades. What's going on? What's the problem?
Well, I think there are several reasons, but number one reason is the devaluation policy of Japanese government. Well, since last November, November in 2012, the Japanese government has devalued its currency by 20%, against USA dollar. But how about the Korean won? Korean won has been appreciated by, against USA dollar about 10%. So which means that the American consumers could purchase Japanese products 20% cheaper than before, while they have to pay 10% more to purchase Korean products. So it directly affects the Korean, the manufacturers' exports. As you know very well, GDP, there are several sectors deciding GDP growth. That is directly economic growth. The one is the exports and inputs, government spending and investment and consumption, such kind of things. But in Korea, the trade take the very high portion. So considering these aspects of the Korean economy, the devaluation of Japanese yen has given a very huge impact, negative impact on the Korean economy.
Okay, so largely external factors. Let me ask you this. In your opinion, what would be the optimal GDP growth rate for the Korean economy if all things go well?
Well, to keep the dynamism, momentum in Korean economy, I think as an economist, I think at least 4% economic growth is needed. 4% up to 5%. But the reality is quite different. What I mean is that because, as we discussed before, because unfavorable external circumstances as well as internal situations such as the North Korean issues, the Korean economy has been in a better shape in some sense, which means that we will have serious difficulties in keep the economic momentum in some sense in 2013. So considering these external and internal factors, I think that maybe we could achieve the economic growth in the range from 2.5% up to 3% this year, I think.
If you read any Korean newspaper, there's always cries for a low won. Isn't it time that Korea got past this? Now companies like Samsung, Hyundai compete pretty strongly on quality rather than price. Can we now move beyond the low won era?
Well, one thing which I want to, that's good points, but we have to think about, in order to improve the quality of A products, well, we cannot generalize it, but on the average basis, it will take a long time. It will require huge investment. But the impact of the A policy, such as devaluation policy, can affect the market immediately. So there is some time gap in the effect from implementation of these two different the approaches. That is the very important thing. So if the qualities are very similar, the consumers consider the price first. Well, look, and the another thing is that the global market has been in a bad shape for the last several years. So the American consumers purchasing power parity and the European consumers purchasing power parity, purchasing power has been weakened. So in the middle of such a kind of crisis, certainly the price can be the number one factor determining the consumer's decision, I think.
Let's move from the international situation to the domestic situation. There are essentially two drivers, two locomotives for the Korean economy. One, we've just discussed, exports. The other one is domestic consumption. And this is the problem, of course, because Koreans have taken on such household debt that domestic consumption is continually falling. Koreans went from being, I think, one of the highest savers in the OECD to some of the most highly indebted households in the OECD within the space of about 10 years. Very briefly, how did that happen?
Well, in fact, in the year 2000, the interest rate in Korea was very low, and in the middle of those kind of circumstances, the real estate, particularly house prices, went up dramatically. So many people want to purchase the houses with the money borrowed from bank, because they were very certain to make money from that kind of the behavior. But from 2008, what kind of problem we had? As you know very well, since 2008, there was a global financial crisis. In 2008, the American economy was hit by the American financial crisis sparked by the Lehman Brothers. And in 2010, the physical crisis in Europe. So these two countries, the EU and America, have been the number one and the number two market for the Korean manufacturers. So the Korean, the economy was directly hit by the crisis in these regions. So the people should have to pay back, their interest to the bank. But as I said before, the Korean economy was cooled. So they cannot make enough money to pay back the interest rates. This is the kind of the beginning of the huge household debts.
The unvirtuous cycle.
Yes, right. And I think this is the beginning of the household crisis and debt crisis in Korea. Well, for the last several years, the Korean government has made every effort to reduce the household debt, because that it can be a bomb in the Korean economy. But I doubt whether the policies taken by the government has been very effective or not, because I don't think it was not very effective. But that is the question. We have to find an answer as soon as possible.
Last year's presidential election, key buzzword, economic democratization.
Right.
There's a strong sense in the market, the macroeconomy, the microeconomy. This is a very uneven playing field. The big boys are the big players, the small boys don't really get a chance, a share of the pie. Do you agree with this? And if so, what actually can be done to sort of recalibrate the economy and help the situation for small and medium-sized enterprises?
I fully agree with the opinion. We have to change the so-called the economic structure. SMEs should play a more important role in Korean economy. As you know very well, for the last several decades, the so-called several dozens chaebols, big business conglomerate, has played the most important role, which means they has taken the largest piece of cake. But right now, to keep the momentum of the Korean economy, I think the SMEs should play a more important role. Because from the experiences of other countries, such as UK, Margaret Thatcher emphasized that SMEs should be play the critical role in
driving
UK.
Force,
Yes, so they did actually. Of course, they did not perform very well as much as the expectation. But anyway, they healed the so-called the UK problems.
The sick man of Europe.
Sick man problem, yes. But I think we should follow take some lessons from for example, UK's experiences. And I think the leader, particularly Park Geun-hye and the other political leaders, found the right answer in order to...
What is the right answer?
That means that they recognize the importance of the SMEs in the Korean economy.
Gotcha. Sorry, by which I mean, the chaebol have got all the capital, they get all the best human resources, they're accused, at least of bullying their suppliers, of setting unfair contractual terms and so on. There's a whole raft of problems around this problem. What are some of the tactical things the government can or should do?
I think, whenever I have a chance, I have emphasized so-called the selection and concentration approaches. You know what I mean? We have many SMEs, in terms of number of enterprises, 90%, more than 90%, the registered firms are SMEs. Well, we cannot help them, all of them, you know what I mean? So I think we have to select the SMEs which have the comparative advantages in the global market, or which have the potential to have the comparative advantages in the global market, and the government should have to concentrate, providing more help, more aid to the companies.
Assuming you can actually identify these companies, actually on this show we do try to uncover some hidden champions. Assuming these can be found, what kind of policies are needed to support them?
Well, very recently, particularly since the launch of the new government, Korean government has revised many supporting systems. For example, Bank of Korea increased their research fund for the SMEs, and the government itself also has increased the budget for the R&D of the SMEs. But I do think the policies, cannot be for every single SMEs.
Sure.
They should select the, as I said before, SMEs which have the competitive advantages or which have the potential to be the strong competitors in the global market. Then we have to help them.
Do you have any idea of, what percentage of companies we're talking about? Of course, many SMEs are mom and pop stores, restaurant owners, guys driving their own taxis, that kind of thing, which are very, very domestically and locally focused. What sort of percentage of the economy do you think might be in these hidden champions that are arguably globally competitive?
I do not have the chance to calculate by myself, but I think the flying goose effects, you know what I mean? Flying goose effect. That means
flying
that,
goose.
yes. So several SMEs perform very well. The other SMEs will have the different perspectives. They will be changed to be very more positive.
They will have flock after them.
Flock after,
Gotcha.
yes.
Okay.
So I think that
The flying goose effect.
yes, these are, I think, has quite strong significance, importance. Why? Because right now, the many Korean SMEs have very negative perspectives on their future. You know what I mean? We cannot be very successful. I think we will not be, we will be betrayed by the others, or we cannot be successful or something like that. But I think by showing this, the so-called outcomes, it can be a kind of some stepping stone for them to change their attitude. You know what I mean? I want to quote one of the very old, good sayings of Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher said that be careful to think about, because why? The thinking will determine your saying, what kind of saying you will make, and then to be very careful to when in your words. Why? Because it will determine fortune.
Your fortune.
Yes.
I think, therefore I am.
You're right.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I think thinking is very important.
So you're saying they need not just capital, R&D and export support, they need a dose of self-confidence.
Sure. Emotionally, we can change the general atmosphere, and then step by step, the Korean government also will have confidence in helping SMEs. Then I think that will be the beginning of the very successful SME policy.
And presumably that's not just for SMEs themselves, it's for all Korean society.
Yes.
They no longer just want to work for the chaebol.
Right.
Okay.
Of course, technically, they should have to develop some systems to prevent the chaebols from the exploding SMEs. They did in some sense for the last several years, but I think that this is quite the micro level things. But I think the most important thing is that we have to start first. We have to change the atmosphere first. Then to do that, I think the selection and concentration approach seems to be very important.
Selection and concentration and the flock of goose approach.
Right.
Okay, gotcha. Big picture, long term. What are the bright spots for the Korean economy? What are the big opportunities, and what are the dark spots? What are the risks?
Well, regretfully, I think we have the more unfavorable the factors than the opportunities. I think. Well, if I give you the unfavorable things first one is the unstable external situations. Still, USA economy is struggling to overcome the financial crisis, even though they show very slow recovery. But we have to wait and see. And also, how about the China? China's economy will also show some different shapes from the previous situation. I mean, the first quarter of this year, unlike our expectation, the GDP growth rate was 7.7%. So because of that, the American Wall Street was hit by that kind of the Chinese the economic growth rates. I mean, of course, the devaluation policy of Japanese government,
which you covered earlier.
Yes, and then all these things are and huge household debt in Korea. Sure. All these things are the very negative factors on the Korean economy. The positive one, I mean, certainly Korean new government tried to implement, develop and implement new policies in order to revitalize the Korean economy. I think that I won't have very high hope or expectation on their policy. And the second one is, as I mentioned before, it can be the negative factor as well as the positive factor. Okay. That is the recovery of global economy. Even though it is very slow, but certainly the Korean exports to U.S. The first half this year, it is expected to increase 1.1% over the same period last year. Okay. But in the coming second half of this year, the Korean exports to the USA market is expected to increase by roughly 6.6%. Okay. So this kind of calculation reflects the economic recovery in USA market. I do think that maybe these two things are the positive factors on the Korean economy in the year 2013, I think.
Okay. Professor, it's been a pleasure having you on Bizline. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me today.
Well, don't mention that. Thank you. If you've opened any major international newspaper over the last couple of weeks, you will have seen mention of Kaesong. Kaesong is an industrial park. It's set up inside North Korea, and it marries the capital and the know-how of 123 South Korean firms with the labor of about 53,000 North Korean workers. It's currently the only significant inter-Korean cooperation project actually in existence, and as such, it holds immense symbolic value. Moreover, it's a key source of hard currency for the cash-strapped North Korean state. Now, Kaesong has fallen victim to inter-Korean politics, and the entire future of this project, which was once seen as the blueprint for a possible South Korean economic vitalization of the moribund North Korean economy, hangs in doubt. In our North Korean segment, we take a look at the possible futures of this unique and important, yet endangered project.
공업지구 사업을 잠정 중단하며 그 전폐 여부를 검토할 것이다.
우리의 의사와 상관없이 공단 자체가 폐쇄될 위기를 맞고 있는 현 상황에 대해 당혹감과 더불어 참담한 심정을 금할 수 없다.
On April 9th, more than 53,000 North Korean laborers failed to show up for work at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, bringing the decade-long inter-Korean joint business operations to a halt.
Now's the time for North Korea to end belligerent approach that they've been taking.
I urge the DPRK authorities to refrain from making any further provocative measures and rhetorics.
자신들이 국제사회 그리고 미국 그리고 한국에 대해서 뭔가 메시지를 계속 보내고 있는데 거기에 대해서 자기들이 원하는 반응들이 안 오니까 결국은 개성단을 흔들면서 반응이 오게끔 만들고 있는 거고 실제로 일정 부분 효과를 내고 있다고 그렇게 이제 볼 수가 있습니다.
Plans for the Kaesong Industrial Complex, located about 60 kilometers north of the South's capital city of Seoul, emerged from the first ever summit between the two Koreas in 2000. South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, father of the current leader, agreed to launch the joint venture as an example of inter-Korean business cooperation.
경제 협력을 통해서 평화 구조를 만들어 나가자. 이제 그런 취지가 이제 남북한 지도자가 합의를 했고, 그래서 가장 시범 사업으로 시작한 것이 개성단이라는 거죠.
It first opened in December of 2004. Since then, the Kaesong Industrial Region has grown to house 123 South Korean businesses, of which almost 60% produce apparel, shoes, and wristwatches, and 19% machinery and metal. While the Communist North has provided land and workforce, the Democratic South has supplied everything else, from electricity and raw materials to communication facilities and the capital to construct and run the site.
개성공단 운영을 위해 투자한 비용은 최소 1조 원 정도가 되는 것으로 추산됩니다. 정부가 철도나 도로 인프라 등을 명목으로 지급한 비용은 3,600억 원 정도이며 입주 기업이 시설 투자를 포함하여 기업 운영을 위해 지불한 비용은 현재 5,600억 원 정도에 이르는 것으로 계산됩니다.
Thanks to South Korea's investments and North Korea's cheap yet skilled labor force, production skyrocketed from less than $15 million in 2005 to a whopping $469.5 million in 2012. During the same period, the communist state earned more than $370 million just in wages for their workers.
실제로 2013년 북한 근로자 1인이 받는 급여를 보면 이제 기본급과 복리후생비, 그다음에 기타 비용 등을 다 합해서 약 134달러, 한 달에 받는 금액이 한 134달러 정도에 이르는 것으로 보이는데요. 42달러 정도만 이제 북한 근로자에게 돌아가는 것으로 알려져 있는데
Due to the North's boycott, all South Korean factories in the complex have ground to a halt. Most staff returned to south of the border, leaving everything behind, including equipment and tons of already completed goods.
8분의 1도 안 갖고 왔어, 8분의 1.
근데 그럼 앞으로 남아있는 분들이 좀 더 가지고 나오실 예정이에요?
차가 없어요.
차가 없어요.
근로자 1인이 4명의 가족을 부양한다고 계산했을 때 실제로는 5만 4천 명 정도가 아닌 21만 명의 북한 주민이 생활고까지 이어질 수 있다는 점을 기억할 수 있습니다.
And when things did not go as desired, North Korea intermittently disrupted operations at the Kaesong Industrial Zone to express its displeasure.
지금은 남북한의 불신, 또 미국과 북한 간의 불신이 너무 깊은 상황에서 북한이 뭔가 확실한 목표의식을 가지고 단계적으로 압박을 이제 강도를 높여 나가는 그런 수순에 있기 때문에 과거하고는 질적으로 이제 북한의 조치가 다르다.
Although there have been some ups and downs, it has been resilient to political and military disputes between the two Koreas along the way. And that is why it has earned the title of the indicator of the real state of inter-Korean affairs.
그나마 이 북한이 가장 성공적인 경제협력 프로젝트라고 이제 평가받아온 사업이 개성공단인데 그 평가가 이제 다시 원점으로 돌아가는 그런 상황이 되니까 당연히 이제 북한 경제에는 상당한 부정적 영향을 미칠 수밖에 없겠죠. 예.
How much more can North Korea afford to jeopardize its already ailing economy and people? With the international community unprecedentedly calling in unison for dialogue, experts say now is the chance for the regime to make the next move, a wise one. So, let's talk.
And that's all we have time for you on this week's Bizline. So let's talk about next week. Now, the Korean economy is a very large space indeed. It does everything from chips to ships. We can't cover every single niche, so we want some feedback. We want to hear what you would like to see. So please visit the Arirang TV website, click on Bizline and give us some of your feedback. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm Andrew Salmon. This was Bizline. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.